Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first Sunday of 2023. I hope you had a great night and you brought the year in praising God in some fashion. Let's go to, with that being said, we're talking about a new year. We're talking about time. Let's go to 1 Samuel 13. We're going to be talking through scriptures 2 through 13. Okay, let's get it. Saul chose 3,000 men from Israel. 2,000 were with him at Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah in Benjamin. The rest of the men he sent back to their homes. Jonathan attacked the Philistine outpost at Gibeah, and the Philistines heard about it. Then Saul had the trumpet blown throughout the land and said, "Let the Hebrews hear." 4. So all Israel heard the news. Saul has attacked the Philistine outpost, and now Israel has become obnoxious to the Philistines. And the people were summoned to join Saul at Gilgal. The Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth Aven. 6. When the Israelites saw that their situation was critical and that their army was hard pressed, they hid in caves and thickets, among the rocks, and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops were with him, quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings," and Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offerings, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. "What have you done?" asked Samuel. Saul replied, "When I saw that the men were scattering, and that you did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling to Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering." "You have done a foolish thing," Samuel said. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time." Once again, we're talking about time. Lord, we thank you for your word. I'm going to label this discussion as "Don't watch the water boil. Let it develop." Don't watch the water boil. Let it develop. Precursor to what's going on here in First Samuel 13, right before, I think it's in 12. It started off. It's Samuel's making his departure, his retirement, and it all stemmed from the Israelites not wanting God as their king anymore. They wanted a physical king like the other nations around them had. Hear me. Per their request, they asked for a human representation of a king versus God. And Samuel told them point blank, "You guys asked for a foolish thing. You sinned when you did that, but we're going to give you what you asked." And what they received was Saul. Okay, so just precursor to what's going on here. So here we have Saul, and I find it very unique in this situation. It says in 13:1, it described that Saul was 30 years old when he took helm. Okay, and he was in place for 45 years. But you could tell here in that first in Samuel 13:2, you could see what's to become of Saul in his mannerisms, his shortcomings. It says in 13 that Saul chose 3,000 men from Israel, 2,000 were with him at Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan. So Saul had 3,000 men in Israel, 2,000 were with him at Michmash, and in the hill country of Bethel, 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah. The rest of the men he sent back. But in 3, this is where I see signs of flaws that we're going to see later on when Saul begins to deal with David, his replacement. Jonathan attacked the Philistine outpost at Gibeah, and the Philistines heard about it. Then Saul had the trumpet blown throughout the land and said to the Hebrews, let the Hebrews hear. And in 4, he says something key here. So all Israel heard the news. Saul has attacked the Philistine outpost, and now Israel has become obnoxious to the Philistines. You see here, Saul took the credit for what his son Jonathan did. Saul wasn't even around. Okay, but Saul took the credit here. I'm just saying that right now because we're going to see how this influenced some decisions later on. You've heard me talk about times past. What's influencing you? All right, I see some cracks in Saul's armor when it comes to pride, because he had to take claim for that. You're going to see it later on. If you read through 2 Samuel, you'll see where Saul had when we talk about a crack here, it fell apart in 2 Samuel when he started dealing with David. But I'm gonna move on. So, once again, we're talking about don't watch the water boil. This whole thing is set up where Saul was told to wait for Samuel to get there to do the burnt offering in the sacrifice. But as you see, as time has it, Saul did not come at the appointed time. Samuel did not come at the appointed time. So here we go. I was in a conversation not long ago, and I was speaking with someone, and we were talking about life and agendas that we set and goals that are set and things that are put in place for our lives. And my key talking point was stop watching the water boil. And I use the analogy, when you prepare a meal, 4-course, 3-course, whatever meal, there's key things that there's key steps in which you use to prepare it. Usually when you make a meal, you're doing several different things at once. There's several things that's going on to create the one meal. Hear me. And my analogy was when you put on, I'm one of those guys that like rice with every meal. That's just how I was raised. But, whether it be rice, whether it be anything else that you use, that you put a pot of water on, what seems to take forever is if you were to sit there and wait for that water to boil. It creates a whole lot of anxiousness and tension waiting for it to boil. Imagine sitting and putting the water. It takes forever. But as soon as you go, where I'm watching, while I'm boiling the rice, I'm gonna go chop up these vegetables, or I'm gonna go, I'm gonna clean the meat, and or I'm gonna season the chicken, or whatever's on your agenda per your meal. Your goal is not to just wait on the water to boil before you start doing these other things. You're doing them simultaneously. God is telling us, I know what you're asking for, I've already done. I've already done these things. But why are you waiting on time? And why are you waiting on it to develop? Do something else. We create our own anxiety by watching the water boil, by sitting back, asking God for something, and waiting for it intently to manifest. When God's saying, okay, while this is developing, Go do something else that's in the line of what you need to do. Meaning, put on the rice, boil your water. While you're doing that, go clean the vegetables. Go clean the vegetables. Go cut up your meat, marinate your meat, season the meat, start the oven, put your rolls in the oven. There's things to be done while the water is boiling. Saul's problem was he was watching the water boil. We'll take it back in. Let's go to in 1 Samuel 13 and 11. When Samuel came and asked, what did you do? Listen to the three things that Saul said, King Saul said to Samuel. Number one, he said, I saw my men running. So while they were waiting, the men were watching. His subjects was watching what the Philistines were doing. They were afraid. Some of them left. Some of them broke camp and went to Gad and Gilead. They abandoned him. Some of them, in that, the rest of the camp was getting restless because they were looking at the enemy. They were watching the enemy. They were ignoring what God had already established and watching the enemy. And here we go. Saul said, when I saw my kindred men running, and this is the second thing. He said, and you did not come at the set time. Here he is. He's posting blame. So he's telling Samuel, well, I did what I did because you weren't on time. See, all this while you've got to understand that the reason why Saul did this is he's calling out is all because he created a level of anxiousness. He's watching the water boil. He's watching his men. He's looking at the clock. He's like, well, you said you were going to be here. And he's building pressure on himself because he's allowing time to not work in his favor. He's not letting it develop. He's not doing other things and encouraging the men. See, what Saul should have been doing is he should have been in the camp encouraging the men, refocusing the men. Hey, telling them not to look over there and focus on what God told us to do. But this is where immaturity plays in. Just remember, he just took reign. This is what the people asked for. And then the third thing he said, the enemy was assembling. So instead of watching and working on the meal that he was preparing, he was looking at what everybody else was doing. He was watching the enemy. Okay? And then this is what he said. I thought. So, once again, what's influencing you? Before I move on, one point I want to make about that. Don't watch time. Let it develop. Don't watch the time. Let it develop. Wait with anticipation, but be anxious for nothing. Yes, you're supposed to be watching the water. Yes, when you're cooking, you're watching everything to make sure it don't burn. But you're not anxious. You're not creating a situation of anxiousness. These things have to happen in order. Typically, the thing that takes the longest to cook is what you put on first. And things that take the shortest to cook, you put on last. 13:12, I'm going to point out something here. In 12, I wrote down, you do not have to ask for help when God has already given it. See, Saul made the statement that I realized that you weren't here. And as he said, the people are getting anxious. I'm watching the enemy, and you weren't here right at the point in time. So I thought, and what I got out of that is that he said that I realized that I'm about to go into battle, and I haven't sought the Lord. Well, wait a minute. The Lord had already given and had favor with him. You don't have to ask for what he's already given you. You just have to let it develop. But the things that influence us want us to jump time. See, I've got a bunch of nephews, nieces and nephews, and you've heard me tell the story before about uh, you can't look at what I've accomplished in 50 plus years and try to have and be who I am when I've got 25 years. Uh, I've got 25 years of jumpstart on you, meaning you can't have what I have and you haven't put in the work. There's things you have to do to develop to get here. Hear me. We live in a generation and a time, and we like the instant gratification. You want the shiny stuff and the big house on the hill. You want it now, and it doesn't work that way. You have to let things develop it. You can't even handle it right now. Hear me. So let's stop asking for what's already given to us, but let it develop. Once again, don't watch the water boil. Don't try to bypass time and ignore the direction because of the immediate gratification. Don't try to bypass time and ignore the directions that was given because we want immediate gratification. This is where the term "it's better to be obedient than to sacrifice" comes from. The Lord has already set things in place. You only need to be concerned with time if you are outside of God's timing. You only need to be concerned with time if you're outside of God's timing and within your own. See, if you bypass God's timing because you want to fast forward to be where you want to be now, that's when you need to be concerned. When you set your own boundary of time, it can be a hindrance. It can cause anxiousness. It would cause for you to put yourself in jeopardy. Hear me. You are not restricted by time, location, or geography, or man's currency, or man's approval. You're only restricted by your faith or the lack thereof. I'm going to repeat that. You are not restricted or governed by time, geography, man's approval, or man's currency. You're only restricted by your faith or the lack thereof. What are you saying? Meaning, you don't have to allow anxiousness. Men, remember, we're not supposed to be anxious. Remember that. He tells us specifically, don't be anxious. You don't have to allow your anxiousness or whatever encouraging that anxiousness or whatever the hidden things that's behind this anxiousness. You don't have to let that be your line in the sand that you draw. You don't have to. Only thing you have to do is believe God and have faith and do what you're supposed to do. It'll develop. He tells us, let it develop. Stop watching the water boil. Do the other thing that you're supposed to do to create the meal while you're waiting on that pot of water to boil. Does that make sense to anybody? I hope I'm clear today. We're starting a new year. I'm not the one for setting goals per se. I'm the one for practicing what I've heard instantly. Not waiting. I said, I'll do that next week. I'm saying, if you're hearing this word right now, act upon it. If you know you've got a problem with anxiousness and creating a level of anxiety for yourself that's unnecessary, stop. Because you got to realize you're doing that. That's not of him. Your anxiousness is because you're outside of the boundaries of what he's called for you to do. Because if he's called for you to do it, it's already done. Your healing is already here. It's already was spoken before time. We are healed by stripes. Hear me. That means it was already done. So a lot of things that we're trying to do, it's already there. We just need to put those things in place and let it develop. I hope that makes sense for someone today. I hope my thought was clear. Stop watching the water boil. Go do something else. Let it develop. Amen. We'll talk soon.